Okay, this is chapter 3 of B1. I'm going to do it in two stages because there's quite a lot to go through. There's nervous system and all the hormones, so we'll do it in two parts. We'll start with the nervous system. So our nervous system is designed to be able to detect stimuli in our environment so we can respond to it, okay? And the way in which we detect stimuli is via receptors. So we receive the information and then we can act on it. And there's quite a lot of examples of receptors, but I think there were things that you're already aware of. So our eye, for example, is a receptor which is going to detect light, okay? So changes in light, for example, a ball being thrown towards you, that sort of thing, you can detect that with your eye and do something about it. Our ears will detect sound, which we know, but they also detect position and balance. So you might know if you have an ear infection, your balance is a bit off, and that's because you've affected that receptor. Okay. Your skin is also another receptor, and that can detect touch, pressure, pain, and temperature. So quite a few examples there. And finally, the last lot of receptors you need to be aware of is in the tongue and the nose. So these will detect chemicals in the air and the food. That's what they detect, and that enables us then to taste, okay, and to smell. So don't put taste and smell, make sure you put the detecting the chemicals in the air and the food. That's an important difference. So these are all examples of receptors. Now just be aware that you may see a funny diagram a little bit like this in your exam, and all that is a light receptor, okay? So it's exactly the same as a normal cell. The only difference being is that it's got a funny shape because it's specialised, but it still has a nucleus, cytoplasm and cell membrane, just like a normal animal cell. So don't be confused by a diagram that looks like that. That's just an example of a cell that would be in our eye, okay? So it's just an example there. So the receptors we start off with, these are the things that detect the stimuli, and when they've done that, they need to send the information off towards our brain so we know what we're going to do about it. So it leaves the receptor down a sensory neuron, and this is the neuron or the nerve that takes information from our sense, okay, so from our receptors off to the central nervous system. So here's our central nervous system. The central nervous system is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. They're the two parts of the central nervous system. So it travels between that along relay neurons, a bit like a relay race, passing that message back and forth until it's made a decision of what it's going to do. When the brain has sort of coordinated our response and decided what we're going to do, it's then going to pass down a motor neuron, and that's going to go off now to the effector, okay, which is going to have the effect. Now an effector can either be a muscle or a gland. Okay, so it may cause a movement response where we change our position. So for example, if we detect the light, so a ball coming towards our face, we might move our muscle and catch that ball. We may also stimulate a gland, and that could release a hormone or something else. So for example, it could release adrenaline because we're a bit frightened, and it causes us to run away. So there's a couple of different examples there of effectors, but it will either be a muscle or a gland. So we can see there's a number of different neurons here, and these neurons, so sensory to a relay, relay to a motor, have gaps in between them, and that gap is called a synapse, okay? And you need to be aware, and the synapse is the gap in between the two neurons. So the information passes down this neuron here, which could be a sensory neuron, okay? So passes down the sensory neuron, reaches this gap, and then so this is all an electrical message passing down, and then it releases a chemical into this synapse, and that chemical travels all the way across to this neuron here and then causes an electrical response in that neuron. So that could be the relay neuron. So traveling down the sensory neuron, releases a chemical goes across the synapse into the second neuron, so for example the relay neuron, and travels off and then reaches a motor neuron and does exactly the same thing again. Okay, so that synapse is the gap in between the two neurons. The last little bit that we need to be aware of is that reflexes, okay? Reflexes are responses that don't involve our brain. They don't involve the conscious areas of our brain. Okay, so we don't need to think about our action, which is really important, because a reflex might be you're blinking, okay, and you haven't got time to think to blink because otherwise you're going to be at risk of too much damage. So it takes over and makes a decision for us. So they're automatic, they're without thought, and they're rapid. So it enables us to stay safe. So good reflexes mean we stay as safe as possible. So that's all you need to know on the nervous system. So we'll now go on to part 2, okay, and look at hormones.